Welcome to Seymour's World on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host today, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about remembering on Holocaust Remembrance Day. If we don't remember history, we'll be doomed to repeat it. Welcome to the show, Seymour. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you, Jay. It's been a while, and it is always a pleasure to talk to you. Unfortunately, this subject is very close to my heart and has elicited a lot of tears in my eyes. But let's do it.
It's important that we remember Holocaust Remembrance Day in hopes it will never again be repeated. Seymour Kazimirski, whose family, his mother specifically, Anne, at 17, was victimized in the Holocaust, and who has spoken, Seymour and his mother have spoken about the Holocaust many times to many groups in Hawaii and beyond. Seymour, can you help us understand the murders, the atrocities of the Holocaust? What happened?
Well, I can try, Jay. It's not easy to understand because it was 80 years ago. And for us to bring it into modern times is to make sure that people understand what was happening in those days. In my mother's case, she was in Poland. She was a 17-year-old girl. Her father was a teacher. They had a very simple lifestyle. Matter of fact, it was so simple they had no toilets. Everything was outside. But they had a wonderful life and they were very happy. They lived in a Jewish community in a little town called Vladimir-Volynsky. And that town was just like any other town in America, around the world, very happy town, until in 1941, Hitler decided to invade Poland and to enter into that town. And basically at that point in time, her father, her mother, her brother, all of them were ready to go into either concentration camps or be killed in the ghettos. And that's what happened. A 17-year-old girl was left alone while all of these atrocities came across through Hitler's propaganda and Hitler's war. So for people to understand how bad it is, and when I say that 65 members of her family were killed, that's everybody. There was nobody left in her whole family after hundreds of years of living through Poland's wars, Poland's atrocities. All of them are gone in less than 1.5 years. So context is very important. And understanding when we say 6 million Jews were killed during that Holocaust, 10 million people were killed. These are numbers, they're zeros, but they're all personal. They're all somebody's mother. They're all somebody's children. In some of the actions, which are the times when the Germans decided to just round up Jews and kill them, in some of the actions, they were separating kids from their mothers, just pulling them apart, throwing kids into the rail cars, taking people and throwing them into ditches and killing them outright. Are you thinking about 100, 200? No, thousands. Thousands of people were killed that way, which they discovered after the war. So for people like me and my parents and people who have Holocaust survivors, we say we cannot forget. We must remember. Why is it so important to remember? Because it's the lessons that we get from what happened during the Holocaust that makes it so important.
We can never forget. It's known in Hebrew as the Shoah, and it was a complete genocide of European Jews during World War II. And it happened between 1941 and 1945, where the Nazis and their collaborators systematically murdered 6 million Jews across German-occupied Europe. And that's around 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population. You must feel lucky to be alive, Seymour.
I am. And I learned that from my mother, because after all she went through, the years of struggle, the years of living in fear, not knowing whether people were anti-Semitic, they were running from farm to farm, from village to village, for 3.5 years until the end of the war. I mean, it was winter time. They had nothing, absolutely nothing. My father and my mother were all alone. And understanding that what they had to go through gives me strength when I hear my mother's voice, or as we'll see in some of the video that you're going to show, where she says, I won the war. Hitler didn't win the war. And she's able to raise a family and make sure that her kids do well. So for us, for the Kazimirski family, it is truly a wonderful life that we have because my mother was able to show us that life, living, is the most important part of what we can give to the world. And that's why I give back so much, Jay. That's why for the last 40 years, I've been giving Holocaust presentations all over the country, basically. Yesterday was one of my most important presentations, if I may digress for a second. Every year, the US military recognizes Yom HaShoah, the Day of Remembrance. And every year, the military invites me, and I'm talking Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, and Coast Guard. They invite me to come and talk to their troops about the Holocaust and what happened. They want them to know and to understand what they are fighting for. But because of the political issues that we have today, and we're not going to discuss that, but because of those political issues and the decision that DEI is going to be eliminated from the military, I received a call from each of those armed forces, the Coast Guard, the Navy, the Marine, the Army, and the Air Force. And they said, Seymour, I'm sorry, this year you cannot come and talk to our troops because it's not going to be allowed. And I got a little angry, Jay. I said, what do you mean not allowed? What does this have to do with DEI? We're talking about education. We're talking about your sailors. We're talking about your soldiers understanding what happened during the Holocaust and why we must never let it happen again. But that was the decision. Well, guess what, Jay? About 2.5 weeks ago, I get a call from the Navy chaplain and the Navy rabbi here in Honolulu. And Chaplain Stennett says, Seymour, do you still have the date available, which was yesterday? And I said, yes, I do. He said, we are going to make this happen. And I said, I beg your pardon? And he said, Seymour, I'm going to make this happen. He went to his admiral, Jay. They went to Washington. They went to the White House, and they received permission to do a Yom HaShoah presentation yesterday, which I did, and thanked them for 1,000,000 times because they did everything they could to make sure that the memory of the Holocaust is ingrained in their Navy soldiers and their Navy enlisted men. And everybody that was there came up to me afterwards and said, thank you so much for your mother's story. Thank you so much for involving the 442 and letting us understand how Hawaii had a major portion of saving Dachau. So to me, Jay, yes, it's very, very personal.
Oh, I'm sure. So that's a great story about the military and the background of your talk yesterday. Now that you made a movie, but can you please give us the background of the movie? Can you introduce the movie? Can you tell us what the movie is intended to convey and what it does convey?
Absolutely. The movie is called Hawaii and the Holocaust. As you know, my primary mission in life is education. I want to educate children from high school, college, even middle school sometimes, all the universities in the state of Hawaii. I want them to understand the lessons of the Holocaust, which we'll talk about later. And so I needed to have something that could bring a video to them of my mother, for instance, and her talking about what happened to her personally, not just me as a first generation survivor, but an actual survivor. So I did a portion of the video on my mother. And then I did another portion on the 442. That is one of the regiments that liberated Dachau. And I have two soldiers from Hawaii on the video that talk exactly what happened to them. What happened when they approached Jewish people that were skeletons? There was not there was nothing on them except bones. People who had never hadn't eaten in days, and they weren't allowed to feed them. And when your audience sees what these guys talk about, these two soldiers, they will understand why it is so important for the military to be involved in the lessons of the Holocaust.
Yeah, there's a connection between Hawaii and the Holocaust and this video and the military, of course. A very powerful movie. Thank you for making it. And I'm hopeful that it will really get around because it's not just the military and the various military bases. It's everyone. Everyone in Hawaii has to know about this. And you have done more than your fair share to educate people here. There are some takeaways that we need to talk about, and you referred to them earlier. And I will read the takeaways, and I would appreciate if you would, go into some detail on each of them. The first one is, what are we talking about here? Preventing history from repeating. Never again. What's the takeaway there?
Well, the Holocaust demonstrated how prejudice, propaganda, and political manipulation can lead to genocide. Now, we can't lump Holocaust and genocide together because Holocaust was a one-time effort by a world leader to eradicate all Jewish people. And that's why it's so important to remember that preventing that history from repeating itself is so important. We reinforce our commitment to preventing similar atrocities again.
Another takeaway, Seymour, is honoring the victims and the survivors.
You know, 6 million Jewish people passed. Four or five other different types of people passed. Hitler was absolute in his idea that he wanted a perfect race, and Jews were not included. Homosexuals were not included. Transgenders were not included. Black people were not included. Chinese, but yellow people were not included. So, I mean, if we honor those victims and survivors, we're making sure that we're remembering their suffering. It ensures that their stories are not forgotten, and it really respects the resilience of survivors. Because for them to do what they were able to do in the Warsaw Ghetto, for them to be able to survive inside the Holocaust, inside the concentration camps, nobody should ever forget.
One of the very troubling things in modern times is this notion of Holocaust denial, where people actually seriously deny that it ever took place, or they distort it. And we have seen that emerging in our lives, Seymour, for many decades after the Holocaust. It's not just ignorance, it's much worse than that. Can you talk about fighting Holocaust denial and distortion?
Well, the main issue here is that you will always find people that deny the Holocaust ever happened. Even to this day, when I lecture at some colleges, there will be a couple of neo-Nazis there. There'll be a couple of people who say this never happened. Jay, that will never stop. But if we don't continue teaching the lessons of the Holocaust, that will only get larger. And that brings us, of course, to the anti-Semitism problems today. So we must continue to make sure these deniers of the Holocaust are totally written away or somehow pushed away from our thought processes. That's the most important part.
It really is, because it's a current issue and it's something that is happening now. Now, there's another one that talks about a takeaway, talking about teaching tolerance and human rights. The Jewish people have always been tolerant and interested and supportive of human rights. And there are so many examples of that. Can you talk about that as a takeaway from the Holocaust?
The Holocaust illustrates the consequences of intolerance and racism. And learning about it, it fosters empathy. I can't tell you how many people I talk to come up to me afterwards and say they didn't realize it was this bad, or they had very little education in their schools about what the Holocaust was. So I find the importance of human rights and dignity are what the Holocaust is a lesson of. And that's part of what we need to do as we continue teaching on the Holocaust.
Absolutely, should never be forgotten. Then you have democracy. Democracy, hardly a day goes by these days when we don't wonder if we're still going to have democracy around the corner, not only in this country, but in so many other autocratic countries or would be dictator countries. And so I wonder about that, the takeaway from the Holocaust involving the fragility of democracy and how important it is to have democracy to avoid a recurrence of the Holocaust.
Well, Jay, that is the most or one of the most important points about talking to you today. The Nazis were able to convince German people to do whatever they were told to do. Every time they would see, let me see if I have it here. I do. I don't know if you can see it, but every Jewish person that was under Nazi rule had to wear this sign. And this sign, Yud, means Jew. And that gave the Germans the right to treat you like you were vermin, like you were a piece of dirt. You couldn't walk on sidewalks. You could only walk in the gutters. They could spit at you. They could do whatever they want to your stores. How is that possible in a democracy? How important is it that we make sure that we protect societies from extremism? It's one of the most important parts of why we continue to teach on the Holocaust. Now, even if people say it's 80 years ago, that is absolutely the wrong thing because we have to learn from history. And history does not just stop after 80, 100, or 150 years. Those lessons have to be continuously taught to the newer and newer generations.
Yeah. And finally, the takeaway, which is so current and troubling, is anti Semitism these days. We've seen a reemergence of anti Semitism in so many places, including in this country. We've seen a reemergence of extremism that results in the same sort of scenarios that were taking place in Germany in the 30s and the 40s. If I tell you that combating anti Semitism and hate is very important as a takeaway, what are your thoughts about that?
It's again one of the reasons this is the most important takeaway. It's because of hatred. Hatred is universal. There are people that are hated all over the world. But when anti Semitism comes up and comes into our universities, comes into our businesses, into our daily lives, that is the beginning of a very, very bad time frame in our society. And I think that anti Semitism is not just about Jews, it's about hatred, about people trying to hate other people rather than trying to understand and be part of society. You start to hate and blame people for the things that you may not have, the things that you want that they may have. And I think we need to be, as a society, much more tolerant of each other, Jay. We must want to be a part of everybody's friendships, a part of everybody's lives, and separate out all of this extremism that we see today.
October 7th and all of the hatred and anti Semitism that we have seen playing out in the Middle East and in this country, it really is very, very disturbing, and perhaps more disturbing than any time in my life, and probably in your personal experience as well. So what is happening here? Why is anti Semitism reemerging? What causes people to be so filled with hatred, unjustified, inappropriate? What makes this happen? And why is it happening now, Seymour?
I think, Jay, that it's such a complex question. You had a few key words in there. Hatred. It is something that manifests itself in human beings. When you see cultures that hate other cultures, when you see what Iran has said that they would do to the Jewish state under any conditions, when you see kids in high schools, kids in colleges say that Israel should be wiped off the map, it's not just Israel. They're talking about Jewish people. They really mean that. They don't want to say it because they think it's wrong to say it. But hatred is the key. We are fostering hatred rather than fostering harmony in our lives. And as long as we keep doing that, Jay, we will not get rid of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, any of the other isms that we have that make society a very difficult place to live in. And Hawaii is not immune to it, by the way. We have had anti-Semitism in Hawaii as long as I've lived here, which is 50 years. So it is alive and well, unfortunately, all over the globe.
It should be condemned every time it appears. But we're almost out of time, Seymour. Let me offer you the opportunity of leaving a message in general for your viewers here, for our viewers. You have talked about these subjects for years, for decades. You have reached out to thousands of people, especially kids, and also, as you mentioned, the people in the military service. But take this opportunity to try to leave the message with everyone who's watching, uh, what they should carry forward on this Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Thank you, Jay. First, Jay, I want to thank you because you have always been one of my mentors. You are always there for me. You always make sure that we do have programs that talk about the Holocaust and some of the other things we do. I want people to realize one thing. Living in the modern world is not about acquiring more and more. Living in the modern world today should be about friendship, about loyalty, about understanding. If we can make that the mantra that we will live by, we will eliminate a lot of the hatred we have. We have to elect the right politicians who understand that that's what we really want. We don't need more and more and more. We need less of the hatred and animosity, more of love and friendship. And that's what I tell every closing argument that I have to every single class that I speak to. And I try to make them understand the lesson of the Holocaust is to make sure it never happens again. And how do you do that? You do it with love and friendship, much less hatred, much less bullying, all of the issues that we see in our society today raising its ugly head. Thank you, Jay.
Seymour, there's one thing that comes out of your last remarks that I would like to ask you about. And it's this whole notion of speaking out on the subject. You speak out, and I like to think that ThinkTech speaks out, but not everybody does. And we all have a choice. We can speak out or we can not speak out. We can be a wallflower or we can be a moral leader. What are your thoughts about courage and speaking out?
Well, one of the takeaways we do when we talk to the kids is we ask them what's right and what's wrong, and we give them an example. And we could be at any school in the nation, and we say to them, "What would you do if you see two or three of your compatriots raping a girl? Are you going to act and do something? Are you going to do nothing and walk away because you have fear? Are you going to tell a teacher or a principal?" And what they have to decide is whether they're going to be on the right side of what to do or on the wrong side. And I make these kids decide that they have to be on the right side. And I do it in a very simple fashion. And I make them understand that if they join together as a group, they can stop those guys from raping that girl. If they join together as a group, they can stop hatred. They can stop bullying. They can do what's right in our society to start building the blocks that we need to make us a better place to live.
Thank you, Seymour. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this show, and thank you for your service to humanity. Let me say it
Thanks,
that
Jay.
way. Okay, we'll leave it there. I'm Jay Fidell, today's host of Seymour's World. We've been discussing remembering on Holocaust Remembrance Day. Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha, Seymour.
Aloha, Jay.